I've always wondered what's so right wing about Freeman. All this, Freeman is right wing, Freeman is don't trust demons and anything. What part of it is right wing? I feel like the only actually right wing series tend to be, very what is the word? Conflicting with American conservatism. So even though it is right wing, it's not right wing in the way that Americans like it. You know what I'm saying? You know what I'm saying? For example, Attack on Titan is extremely right wing. It's a very right wing show, but conservatives don't really lapse on it, even though it's one of the most right wing shows that I've ever watched. Mm. And they don't even identify with it. Though the right wing nature of it, it's very, very obvious. Even though they tended to be like almost like a revolutionary force in the beginning, at least in some elements of it, it's extremely right wing. And I could go into more detail on that later, but this is about frerien. I've never watched frerien. I want to watch it just to review it and just to see if it is right wing or not. But if it's like how this guy is saying, then I could safely say frerien is not right wing because it does not have the elements that right wing uses or lives by. That is the most important. It's more important to identify things by actions and what they actually commit to, rather than just rhetoric.
Telling us that the founding fathers were villains.
Yeah, he's basically going over that liberals were saying the not the right wing, the first of all, the founding fathers, they were leftists, at least in their epoch. Shit, wrong word. At least in their era, they would be considered left wing. One of the hallmarks was, the French Revolution, which was a left wing uprising. And it's the same with the American Revolution. It was very left wing. But left wing today is not the same as the left wings of today. To that era, in this era, the left wing is completely different. Uh, Today they wouldn't be identified by either right wingers or left wingers just because so many of our history has formed it away from their politics, that their politics would be considered taboo in this era. And if you don't believe that, you're kind of lying to yourself. Because if people like Nick Fuentes, or what was another one? Tucker Carlson, Major Taylor Green, people who are in the right, or at least identify with the right, Kenneth Owens, huge influencer, if they believe those traditions were taboo, would be taboo in today's politics, then let's just say that the political compass changed a little bit. It obviously went more left wing. We had the rights for females. There was the rights for voting. There was changes in voting many times, even for men. You used to have to need the need of land and stuff like that, and there was other requirements, and they changed that, so it kept going more to the left, or more to the less what's it called, less of a ruling class would be the best consideration of it. Then he's basically complaining, oh, the left is trying to frame them as racist, or evil, which they were. And the founding fathers knew that they were evil, and even they regretted their own decisions. They were like, I don't want to be remembered as this. I know this is bad. because everywhere in the world it was already taboo. Especially with the slave thing. Slavery was already taboo in other countries, and they knew it, and that's why some of the founding fathers did not want to leave that legacy, and they freed their slaves. And saying that having slaves that is racially based isn't racist, that's kind of, that's a lunacy. That's idiotic. But here's the thing, I don't really think this guy's into politics. I've been into politics for so long. I remember complaining about Obama and stuff like that. For example, I'm a leftist, but I've been I thankfully I never adopted any of the mainstream, because the mainstream is not really where I got the information. Well, I did get it, but I did my own research, and I figured out, conflating evidence about the current dilemma, especially when it had to do with some things. But I'm not getting into that. That'll just extend the video. I'll just carry on. I'm not an Obama supporter. I'm not a Bill Clinton supporter. I'm not a George W. Bush supporter. I'm not a Reagan supporter. I'm not even really that big of a fan of JFK, even though he did have a huge change in the sentiments. Because I still understand some of the political things he did. I would not support it if he was born. If he was running still. Obviously, he would be my top pick, but that's picking of lesser of two evils. I think there's some things that he needed to improve, especially when it has to do with foreign affairs. I do agree with the Israel thing that he said. Just to put that there, but I'll get into detail in another video. I would vote for him if he did run.
Our Constitution was structurally racist, and America itself was an illegitimate.
Yes, that's why there's a what? Well, what is his point? There was some illegal colonization in Europe, but I bet he doesn't talk about that. Well, because it wasn't based on race. Actually, it is. There is some type of racism there. There was racism there. The Irish, remember, but there was another indigenous groups in Europe that they were treated horribly. The Slavic. That's where the word slave comes from. And there's a lot of other things. Europe was not as unified as they like to think. They were they were not necessarily aggressive, but they did have very bad and negative, and almost very what's it called? Very evil relationships with each other. Let's just say that. That's the most easiest way to say this. So there was colonization in Europe. Some European places got colonized uh, by other Europeans. Famously, Britain was colonized, Ireland was colonized. A lot of segments in the upper of the North Pole Sea. I don't know how to call that sea. I'm not a big geography nerd, but in that sea, there's a lot of indigenous places that got colonized, and they were trying to be purged out. Not necessarily. Some of them were by purging of murder, but the other ones was more like what's it called? Evictions or destruction of culture. There's a lot of there is definitely that. There is definitely that in Europe, a lot of destruction of culture that not Europeans talk about it, but not Americans. Americans don't talk about that because it goes against their narrative that Europeans could be racist to other Europeans and they can want to destroy other cultures of their own continent, even though they're the same skin color. In fact, one could be whiter than the other one.
White settler colonial state built on genocide and slavery has now suddenly rediscovered a deep reverence for pretty much all of these things.
This is another this is another thing that we have to go over. He believes that is a was not necessarily ironic. That goes against one value and the other one. Saying something was established either through violence or mass violence, and then saying the Constitution is good, those are two different things. And that's not necessarily the reverence of those founding fathers, but it is, in some sense, the reverence of what the founding fathers left, the Constitution. That's a different thing. A lot of these colonized places, either if it was Islam or Christianity, one of the things they say is, at least we have Christianity, and they revere it. And even though they don't like the settlers or the colonizers, that's the same thing here. And this guy doesn't seem to understand this. Once again, this guy posted this video, and this video looks to be brand new, and it seems to be his only video. I don't know about his Twitter. This guy could honestly just be, a very not really into politics guy. You know what I mean? There's a lot of those in the right wing where most of the information comes from, Twitter, comes from TikTok, and after they do that, they think they're experts. I'm not an expert. I only saying what I already know, and I don't delve into things that I don't know because I don't know. If I don't have any idea to rebuttal, I'll just say I don't know, or I don't have anything to rebuttal with. But I do have, because I do know some information about this.
The left has gone all in on embracing this aesthetic.
Aesthetic. He thinks that it is aesthetic. Rhetoric. What? This guy doesn't know about rhetoric. He doesn't understand if you pick, a rhetoric or establish some sense, a type of sense. What was it called? A gist. There we go. A gist. If you establish a gist, rhetoric is stronger. This doesn't mean that the rhetoric is incorrect or the rhetoric is necessarily wrong or the gist is wrong. That's not what it means. This is this guy's conclusion. Oh, they're using rhetoric. Well, what was his exact words? I don't want to take him out of context.
Slavery has now suddenly rediscovered a deep reverence for pretty much all of these things.
Rediscovered. Rediscovered. Really? Really rediscovered? Really? Are you really gonna argue this? How ignorant do you have to be? Do you think that leftist? There is leftist anarchists, leftist communists. Even though I don't really think communism goes against the Constitution. I'll have to check the specific bills on that too. The bills, Bill of Rights, the amendments. Man, I'll have to do a deep dive. Rediscover constitutions. I'm pretty sure they're pretty strong in there. Dude, their whole identity has to do with free expression. Like, come on. Even the idiot libs, they believe in free expression. Maybe not necessarily in terms of censorship. That will be a cause, that is some sense. But I don't really see them marching or protesting for it. There's definitely some reverence of the Constitution. No. When it comes with the law, I would say no. When it comes to the people, maybe, but I don't know. I don't think so. Many people are very politically, not really involved, especially during or previous. After 2020, there was a big jump in political activity, not seen beforehand. Most of it was just it was just seen as a type of entertainment. It wasn't seen as being taken seriously. After 2020, it started being more and more serious, and you start seeing many things emerging from both the left and the right. Uh, the right went a little schizo, but the left, they were a little slow. That's a big problem with the left. The left tries to gather information, tries to confirm it without before they make up into any conclusion, and they're scared to be, hypothetical. At least during that time, that's what I remember. And it was be seen as what's it called? Not being trustworthy because they wouldn't put their foot in the door. They would wait until they would wait for a consensus on it, which is a negative character trait. You should always, you should at least have a two opinions on that. Said I have no idea what to talk about, which was most, or I'll try to dig into the information. Those are the only two opinions you can have when you're uncertain of something. Anything else? Well, there's a couple others, but those are two good choices.
The left has gone all in on embracing this aesthetic. They dress themselves up as patriots and cosplay as the
Rejecting kings, don't King's Day. Dressing as the founders, yes. But I don't think you understand that people are not being extremely literal, for sense. Just because it looks what would it looks what it is, or looks what it how did it goes again? How does it go again? I forgot. But the point is that people dressing up as the founding fathers doesn't necessarily mean that they're okay with what the founding fathers did. You know what I mean? And it isn't this big deception thing. It's just that they're protest. A lot of people didn't go uh with uniforms without. They went without uniforms. They protested without uniforms. What do you have to say about them? And this thing like, oh, they're using the Constitution, the word Constitution, as deception. What did you say that same about the right wingers right now? They're deceiving on the war. They're deceiving on the job market. They're deceiving on the crimes. They're even deceiving on deportations. And you're not calling that out. There that doesn't mean, oh, accuse a red herring, go fetch. No, 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 no. My point is, maybe he does have this energy for the right, but to saying this is the left wing's identity to use Constitution as an excuse, no. That what? And he also like comparing it to D-Meds. They're like, oh, they're only trying to hurt you. Um, uh, Dude, I don't know how to explain this in layman's terms, but that's just dumb. Frerien is trying to protect. I've already watched the video. Frerien is trying to protect other humans. Uh, The, the left are humans who have interest in humans. They don't have interest in, mm, if they were anti-natalist, I would understand. Anti-natalist is anti-life, basically. The right to what's it called? It's not the right to not be born. It's the right to not. It's the opinion to choose who gets to be born. That's anti-natalist, or yeah, anti-natalist. At least that's one version of it. If they were like anti-natalist, then it would make sense because they're gonna hurt you if they're anti-natalist. I don't know who's more anti-natalist, the left or the right. I think it's the right, definitely. They don't want to be. If they can choose, they will erase all the blacks, all the browns from society. They wouldn't let them be born if they got away with it. I don't know. That would be a good anti-natalist is probably the closest thing to demons. But even then, there's still arguments they could go for uh, for the greater good of humanity. There's anti-natalists in Puerto Rico who were like, I don't want children to be unhealthy. Let's rob all of the people who have any disorders of fertility. No, that wasn't it. There was a different reasons for it. But you know what I mean. You know what I mean. No, that was bad. Puerto Rico was about racism, stuff like that. What's another? Was there any anti-natalist event that did it? I don't remember. No, there wasn't. I don't think anti-natalist events are very common. At least I'm having a hard time figuring out any event that happened there. Okay, instead of anti-natalist, let's think of anti-life. Mass genocide. Let's think of people advocating for that. Mass killing of a specific group. Like how the demons want to, because that'd be a good comparison. They would want that. So in one group you have the mass killers, in the other group you have humans. Uh, he's basically comparing demons to those mass killers, which would be pretty accurate, but then comparing that to the left and saying, oh, they only say Constitution when it benefits it. You could say that about Democratic um, politicians because all politicians play with words, both right and left. More on the right, especially about Christianity, and especially what the founding fathers envisioned, especially when it comes to the finance and investment sectors on Wall Street, Kalshi bets, things like that. There's a lot about lying. Evangelicals, Mormons, non-Christian places like evangelical churches or Mormon churches, things like that. That'll be a good comparison of demons trying to deceive you, which we politicians, but to be the left-wing ideology, that is very. It's not even a stretch. It just doesn't stick because you would have to approve two things. Prove two things. That one, it's necessarily the mass killing of one of the other side, and one, yeah, it would be the mass killing of one side. You would have to prove that, and you would have to prove that the rhetoric is naturally malicious or nefarious. Do you really think that they're trying to harm you? That's what I'm trying to say. Do you really think leftists are these existential threats?
Founding fathers while attending protests. So, what exactly are we supposed to believe? That the founding fathers were irredeemably evil and
They were evil. That's even the founding fathers knew that. That's why they tried to save their own asses after the fact, after they were gonna die, because they knew what they were doing was wrong. As I said, slavery, things like owning slaves, was already taboo at their period. And even after that, those 100 years later, it was still taboo, even during the Civil
2020,
War.
but now they're sacred guardians of liberty to.
Yes, it was their fears. He doesn't seem to understand this. He doesn't understand how you can have two opinions about people at the same time. For example, I could believe in Einstein, but I wouldn't fuck my cousin. You know what I'm saying? I wouldn't marry my cousin like Einstein did. Those are two opinions on someone I revere, and at the same time, someone I think is disgusting. You could have two opinions of what people's work. It's this is literally separating the artist from the art, especially when they're dead.
invoke against the current occupant in the White House? Why does it seem like there's a sizable chunk of the political divide who expects us to accept their.
First of all, right wingers don't care about the Constitution. I don't even think they could recite it or even understand what it stands for. I really do think a lot of right wingers are like the people from, Miami in spring break. They just don't know anything. Well, what's happening? It's a lot of ignorance going on. And I think leftists are more involved into politics, especially because wokeness came out of them. Wokeness was not this feminist issue. It was literally the understanding of systemic issues caused and nefarious or malicious intent. Like he is saying that they are using and twisting words for malicious intent. You know, so funnily enough, free could literally be considered woke because that's what started the movement. The movement started, and once again, I didn't watch free but I watched this guy's video and this guy's explanation of the video. This guy's saying, "Oh, free is calling out the nefarious, malicious, and very inhuman rhetoric that the demons are using to trick the humans." And that's what's one of the key aspects of wokeness. Wokeness started out because it was calling out things that seem nuanced or innocuous or quaint to us was actually very malicious, very nefarious, and was working against us. That is a key aspect of wokeness. So if this is all he has, then Freeman would be considered woke for in terms of political ideology, if that's what he believes in. Which, once again, I don't really think this guy is really politically literate. Please tell me what you guys think, because this guy basically makes me think that Freeman is woke. Freeman, like the first woke people, especially in the 2000s, they saw that things were hurting you, and they were justified with flashly rhetoric that will disarm you, just like in Freeman. Rhetoric that would put you off your guard, for they can go after you and they can hurt you or your neighbors. And that's one of the key aspects of woke. That's what started it all. So this guy trying to convince me that freedom is not woke now, it's making me giggle. But let's continue. I'll try to get everything.
Appeal to things they. American politics at the moment. Now, for those of you who haven't seen it, here's what you need to know about the world of frerien. In this world,
I haven't watched frerien, but he looks like a politician already. He looks like royalty.
demons exist, and they've evolved a very specific survival strategy. They look almost exactly like humans. They have the same bodies, they have the same faces, they
He looks like royalty. And he's command of his own militia. Just very interesting observations that I'm making.
even speak with the same voices. The only thing that really gives them away are the small horns on their head. And you've got to remember, these things have spent centuries studying human beings and learning how to blend into society. They've picked up human speech and behavioral patterns, but none of it's real. The whole thing is a performance. It's a
So he's comparing someone that has completely fabricated their identities. Just like some politicians or some things that were called out by wokeness. And they're going against the framework of a ruling class member. Does that seem like right wing to you? Does that scream right wing to you? This almost to me sounds like the projections that, capitalists do. I'm a practicing socialist. That means if I make my money, I have to give a portion. If I use another person's labor, I have to. I use proportions as the way of paying off, not necessarily a fixed rate. That's what a practicing socialist does. And I always see these complaints of corporatism and capitalism, and they always trying to frame communism or socialism as extremely negative, but then they describe capitalist features. For example, they complain about communism and they call a capitalist country communism or socialist, despite the fact that they live in a capitalist country and they, everything around them would be considered capitalist in itself. There is welfare queens, like Tesla, SpaceX, AI. That's another welfare queen. There's banks that are welfare queens as well. For example, the one that crashed 2008 as a big one. That would be considered, there's a lot of shysters, but that's not communism or socialism in a sense. There is a lot of caveats, a lot of difficult things to explain, and you could go against, against rationing of housing. You could keep some elements of capitalism still be well. Like, for example, private ownership. There's private ownership in China, but there's also the difficulty of, pinning down a government to not necessarily suppress you or harm you, especially with the technological gap and the military strength gap between citizens and the government. My only solution as a practicing socialite, I mean, yeah, socialite, not socialist. I'm also that as well. Then my only proposition would be the mass arming of citizens, all the way to their own, military command. That's why I'm against federalism for that very reason. It's not necessarily that I'm very pro guy. Is that when the technological gap and the military gap between the citizens and the government is so wide, there is very difficult to sustain sovereignty in one's own country. And that's my proposal of socialism. Oh, a post-capitalist society that lives in socialism. That has to be necessary because socialists and communists are very difficult to pin down the government. It is very difficult to do that because it is essentially a stronger presence of the enforcer class, and you don't want that. You always want the enforcer class to be kept in check. And if you need a paramilitary and a competent paramilitary to keep them in check, then that's the perfect way to do it. You need your own paramilitary, and you need your own competent paramilitary to go toe to toe with them. And you could break apart the army to do that, or some sectors, other sectors. But that's my proposition. So this to me sounds like a capitalist coping, saying things are socialist and communist, and then describing capitalism. This literally sounds to me like a right winger complaining about other right wingers, because he didn't make an argument for why it is lies. He only brought up an example of I think it was a congressman or a senator, basically trying to lower, trying to take away, trying to make schools ice free. And do you really think ICE is really protecting people necessarily? Well, they are, because they do. Some of them get court orders. I think it is still 40, 50, but 70 or no, it's 30. Because 30, 70 right now, it's the current criminal conviction rate. That means 30% are still criminals. 70% do not have a criminal record. Don't remember correctly. But the withdrawal of ICE, or the stop of the corporation is usually because of the violence committed by ICE. These are the literal. This is the literally ruling class that is hurting you, and you're trying to deceive you with words, because it makes you hesitate, and it makes you want to support them, and it makes you want not to hurt them. That's what ICE was literally doing. And he's projecting this on liberals, which is funny enough. And he mentions a point that there was an immigrant who was arrested 30 times. I don't even know how this is possible. Me as a liberal, I wouldn't really make that slide. I usually am not necessarily pro prison, but pro checking up on the, what's it called? The tenacity of one subject before releasing them into civilian life. I do agree that there needs to be more checks in it, because there's a lot of money to be made. Maybe it was the anti-money thing, the anti-bail thing. Yeah, I wouldn't really let that slide. I'm really in favor to giving a fine, or what's it called, to jailing judges who do this, who are very lenient on people who are obviously, maybe the crime they committed isn't supposed to be that long, but they're mentally unstable, mentally unwell, and evil. So they wouldn't have to need to be checked. The prohibition of ICE in schools, the prohibition of ICE taking migrants out, or migrants are deporting them. It's not going to stop deportation. That's not how it works. Police still have to do that. It'll just be handed to another organization. You know what I'm saying? Maybe not on the guidance of the federal government, but deportations and warrants will still be handed out. The law doesn't just stop one day.
Manipulative play with one purpose and one purpose only: to weasel their way into a position close enough to do what they actually came to do. Which is to eat the humans themselves. And in one of the most memorable scenes of the first season, Frerien's party encounters a demon that has taken the form of a young.
Yeah, I've already talked about this. But he's more describing politicians. And, you know, ICE, and Homeland Security didn't start until after 2001. And it was a lot of Israeli involvement. And, Trump is trying to send them to the Olympics in a different country. And this is pretty obvious a military force that is trying to suppress you and is trying to soft launch a totalitarian regime. And when I mean a totalitarian regime, I mean jailing teachers, jailing journalists, which they're already trying to do and they're already successfully doing, cracking down on quote unquote protesters or activists, people who are giving welfare, not welfare, charity to other people, and they're still trying to track down on that. And it seems like they're trying to use ICE as a paramilitary front to without consequence. And the fact that he can't make this connection makes me think he's not very politically literate. Maybe he is, because a lot of these anime fans also tend to be Nick Fuentes fans or Tucker Carlson fans or another right winger. And right wingers have made this connection with ICE, that ICE is basically uh, the start of an IDF front here in the United States, suppressing and going against. This is exactly what he's describing. You know, Before ICE, there was still deportations. Let's just put that out right now. ICE is acting like one thing to get to a position of power to do what they actually want to do. That is literally what he's describing frerien is against. But ICE, being pro ICE, is a right wing position, and because he's is it called being dogmatic? Dogmatic when you can only choose one side over the other. Because I'm pretty, I'm very leftist, but I'm very. I don't really care if I end up agreeing with a right winger. You know what I mean? I don't really care if I end up agreeing with it, as long as it's based in facts. Literally based. I don't care. I would agree with a right winger. It doesn't make me embarrassed or anything. So he's literally describing ICE. So the demons would literally be a good representation of the group of ICE as a whole. Of what their entity was constructed to be made for. And that was to be a military force here in the United States, to crush dissent. And they're doing a lot of soft launches with it. They're doing a lot of changes with the police, but the police got too independent, and that's why they're using ICE right now. They're using ICE as an enforcer class, and the fact that they can't see this is very funny to me, because this means one thing: either this guy is a centrist, or this guy is a one-issue voter. But I don't really think he's right wing. Here's the problem with the right wingers. More to the right of this guy, you have both anti-ICE people and pro-ICE people. That confuses me a little bit. Like, why the further you go right, there's anti-ICE and there's pro-ICE. But obviously they're not trying to. It's not because of the immigrants. It's because of the other things that I just went over. They're not being pro-immigrants. That is a very left-wing coded topic. Being pro-immigration is left-wing coded, but being anti-ICE and pro-ICE, that's both right-wing. That was a perfect demonstration that I just went. That ice is the demon that he's complaining about. That frerien says that frerien calls out. ICE as the federal government, Homeland Security. That is what he thinks is right wing, but he's not true to it. Which means this is just another type of rhetoric that he's using to justify his own beliefs. Because when they're up to scrutiny, they don't work. So I was quite surprised. I really believe that, because I always watch Twitter. I'm always on Twitter. I have a job. I'm employed. Whatever. I get to do whatever I want in my free time, okay? I'm employed. And I always was wondering, why is frerien so right wing? Is she like super racist or something? Is she like super nativist or something? And no, he didn't bring up any of that. So I came out in the conclusion that frerien is not right wing. In fact, frerien is woke. She's woke as fuck. She sees someone climbing up to power to hurt people, and she says, we should Luigi Mangione these people. How is that not left wing? How is that not woke? That's straight up dark woke. What the fuck? So I was very pleased with this video. Thank you for whoever posted this. You have opened my eyes. I've always thought frerien was right wing. Obviously, I'm not gonna start liking frerien the show just because it's left wing coded. Like, I'm not like that, bro. That's just not me. Just because some anime has my politics, that doesn't mean I'm gonna like it. I'm very critical when it comes to story. I like characters more than I like stories, how they're written. Well, I'm more of a story guy than action. I just don't see myself liking the show. Nothing about the show necessarily interests me. I heard it's a really good show, but they've also said that about Gachukatu or whatever. I was like, oh, it's such a great show. It's a greatly animated show, and I respect it. It seems like a lot of talented people work on it, but it's just not for me. I have a very peculiar taste. Let me start off by describing anime that I like. I like Dragon Ball Z. What's another one? I've read Monster. I haven't watched the show. I've read Monster. 20th Century Boys is one of my favorite favorite series I've ever read. Monster was cool. I enjoyed it. I've read Berserk, the entirety of it. I'm a really big Berserk fan, but I still have some criticism about Berserk. Maybe I'll go over that. What's another thing? I don't like Attack on Titan. And Attack on Titan is right wing, but I don't like it because it's right wing. I don't like the story because he did everything just to kiss his sister. I know they're not related, but that's why I don't like the show. It's like, what? This is so fucking stupid. Happily joy. It's too upbeat for me. I like Terraformers. It was just such eye candy, such movie candy for me. I love Chainsaw Man. Even after the ending, I still love Chainsaw Man. I'm a big Fujimoto fan. Even when he made Fire Punch, I love Fire Punch too. Fire Punch is so cool. I'm a big One Punch Man fan. I'm a big One Punch Man fan. I hate Pun Pun. Don't even talk about Pun Pun. I fucking hate Pun Pun. Oh, I like Spy X Family. I watched that show, and I read it. I'm up to date about reading Spy X Family. I've also watched Spy X Family because they said this is right wing coded. This is not right wing coded, bro. This is not right wing coded at all. I love Spy X Family. I thought it was cool where they got their Stellas, where they went to the little haunted place. Spoilers. I thought it was very, very cool. I love Spy X Family. I like the Twins show. I've read the twin show. You know the one with the twins. They're identical twins and stuff like that. What's another show? That's it. That's enough with my anime likes. But I'm not necessarily a big anime fan, but I do consume it and I do like some of them. Like I like manga. As I said, 20th Century Boys is one of my favorite. Akira is one of my favorite movies. Uh, Man, I like a lot of anime. I watch One Piece. One Piece kind of fell off after the time skip. I don't like the new designs. I'm up to date to there too. I just like it. I just read it some time to time because I think One Piece is fun. One Piece is not very serious. Their story is in shambles. It just doesn't make sense anymore. And if you think so, you're coping. There's a lot of bad character writing and stuff like that. But yeah, so bye. If you like this, I have BitChute. BitChute, I go into more serious stuff. But this was cool. Thank you for whoever made this video. You've opened my eyes. I love it. I love it. I like that you made this video.